The handcuffs clicked shut around my sister Vera's wrists as the military police dragged her away, calling her a fraud and a disgrace to every real SEAL who ever served. But what they didn't know was that the intricate compass tattoo on her shoulder held a secret that would change everything in less than 24 hours. Before we dive in, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? If you enjoy stories like this, make sure to hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow's episode is truly mind-blowing. Let's get started. I'm Camden, and this is the story of how my sister went from being arrested for stolen valor to being vindicated by one of the highest-ranking officers in the Navy. But before I tell you about that moment when Admiral Westbrook pointed to Vera's tattoo and said those words that saved her life, you need to understand who my sister really is. Vera Blackwood has always been different from other people. At 32, she carries herself with the kind of quiet confidence that makes rooms go silent when she enters. She never raises her voice, never loses her temper, but there's something in her eyes that tells you she's seen things most people never will. Growing up, I watched her face down neighborhood bullies twice her size without flinching, and later, I watched her enlist in the military the day after she turned 18, determined to serve her country in ways she couldn't yet explain to our family. Our father, Colonel Rex Blackwood, understood that drive because he'd felt it himself during his 30 years in the Army. Our mother, Diane, worried constantly, especially during the long months when Vera would disappear on deployments she couldn't talk about, leaving us with nothing but occasional encrypted emails that said simply, "I'm safe, I love you all." What made Vera's arrest so devastating wasn't just the charges themselves, but the fact that everything we thought we knew about her service was suddenly being called a lie. The woman who had quietly returned from overseas with that mysterious compass tattoo, who could spot potential threats in crowds that others missed, who woke up some nights calling out coordinates in languages she claimed not to speak, was now sitting in a federal detention center accused of being nothing more than an elaborate fraud. The FBI agents who arrested her at our family barbecue that Sunday afternoon treated her like a common criminal. But Vera's reaction was what haunted me the most. She didn't protest her innocence, didn't demand to call a lawyer, didn't even seem surprised. She just looked at our father with those same steady eyes and said something that would echo in my mind for days. "Dad, there are things about my service that even you don't know." As they led her away, I caught a glimpse of that compass tattoo on her left shoulder, the one she'd gotten shortly after returning from her final deployment. I'd always assumed it was decorative, maybe symbolic of finding her way back home. I had no idea that every line, every coordinate embedded in that design, every seemingly artistic flourish was actually a coded message that would ultimately prove she was everything she appeared to be, and so much more. This is the story of how a woman who spent years protecting secrets that could never be revealed was almost destroyed by those very same secrets, and how a single tattoo became the key to unlocking a truth so classified that even her own family couldn't know it existed. To understand how devastating Vera's arrest was for our family, you need to know what life was like before that Sunday afternoon when everything changed. For the past 3 years since leaving active duty, Vera had built what seemed like a normal civilian life, but there were always these small details that reminded you she wasn't like everyone else. She lived in a modest apartment in Virginia Beach, about 20 minutes from our parents' house. The place was sparse but organized with military precision. No clutter, no unnecessary decorations, just functional furniture and a few carefully chosen books on her shelves. The only personal touches were a single photo of our family, and that compass tattoo that seemed to catch light differently depending on how she moved her shoulder. Vera worked as a private military contractor, training corporate security teams for companies that operated in high-risk environments. She never talked about her clients by name, but I'd see her loading specialized equipment into her truck early in the morning and returning home late with the kind of exhaustion that comes from intense physical and mental work. Her reputation in the contractor community was impressive. Companies would specifically request her for their most challenging assignments, and she commanded fees that most consultants could only dream about. Our father was proud of her success, but always seemed to sense there was more to the story. Rex Blackwood had spent 30 years in the Army, rising to colonel, and he understood classified work better than most parents would. Still, Even he would get this puzzled expression when Vera would demonstrate techniques or knowledge that seemed beyond what her official records indicated. "Where did you learn that disarm technique?" he asked her once during a family barbecue when she casually disabled our cousin who had playfully grabbed her from behind. "Overseas training," Vera replied, the same answer she gave to every question about her skills. "You know how it is, Dad. They teach you what you need to know for the mission." But Rex's experience told him that standard military intelligence training didn't cover half the things Vera could do. She could read people's intentions from across a crowded restaurant, spot surveillance vehicles that everyone else missed, and had an almost supernatural awareness of her surroundings. Once, during a family trip to Washington, D.C., she steered us away from a metro station 15 minutes before police cordoned off the area for a bomb threat. When I asked her how she knew, she just said she'd noticed irregular patterns in crowd behavior. Our mother Diane had a different kind of worry. She'd spent years learning to cope with the stress of having a husband and daughter in the military, but Vera's deployments had been different from Rex's. There were months when Vera would simply vanish, with no communication beyond occasional coded messages that arrived through unofficial channels. Diane would spend those periods sleeping poorly, jumping every time the phone rang, terrified that uniformed officers would appear at our door with news no military family ever wants to hear. When Vera finally returned from her last deployment 2 years ago, she was changed in ways that were hard to define. She'd always been reserved, but now there was a weight to her silence that felt different. She'd wake up some nights calling out coordinates or names in languages she claimed not to speak. During family gatherings, she'd sometimes stop mid-conversation and stare into the distance, as if she was hearing something the rest of us couldn't detect. "Camden, some things are classified for good reasons," she'd tell me whenever I asked about her service. "The less you know, the safer our family stays." I thought she was being dramatic until that Sunday when the federal agents surrounded our house. That's when I realized that Vera's secrecy wasn't about protecting military information. It was about protecting us from a truth that was apparently dangerous enough to justify years of carefully constructed lies. The woman we thought we knew, the private contractor who trained corporate security teams and lived quietly near her family, was about to be revealed as either an elaborate fraud or something else entirely. And none of us, not even our father with his decades of military experience, were prepared for what came next. The beginning of Vera's nightmare started with what should have been a routine Tuesday morning training session at Naval Station Norfolk. She was conducting advanced tactical training for a corporate security team that worked for an international shipping company. These weren't weekend warriors or mall cops. These were serious professionals who needed to know how to handle piracy threats, kidnapping attempts, and hostile boarding situations in international waters. Vera had been running these kinds of sessions for 2 years without incident. But this particular day was different because the facility was also hosting a reunion event for former Navy personnel. Among the attendees was a man named Carlos Torres, a former SEAL who had left the service under circumstances that had damaged his reputation and his pride. Torres was now working private security himself, but he'd never achieved the kind of success or respect that Vera commanded in the contractor community. When he saw her demonstrating close-quarters combat techniques that he recognized as advanced SEAL training methods, something inside him snapped. "Hold up." Torres interrupted the session, striding into the training area with the kind of aggressive swagger that immediately put everyone on edge. "Where exactly did you learn those moves?" Vera remained calm, professional. "I'm certified to teach these techniques, and my students need them for their operational environment." "That's not what I asked," Torres shot back. "Those are SEAL-specific disarm techniques. I know because I learned them at Bud S. So either you're a SEAL, which would make you the first female SEAL I've ever heard of, or you're teaching stolen techniques you learned from someone who violated their oath of secrecy." The room went silent. Vera's students looked uncomfortable, uncertain whether they were witnessing a professional disagreement or something more serious. Vera maintained her composure, but I could tell from her posture that she was calculating threat levels and exit strategies. "My training credentials are legitimate," she said simply. "If you have concerns about this facility's protocols, you should speak to the commanding officer." Torres wasn't satisfied. Over the next hour, he watched Vera demonstrate techniques that became increasingly specific to SEAL operations. She showed her students how to breach and clear rooms using methods that weren't taught to regular military personnel. She explained tactical communications procedures that Torres recognized from classified operations. Most damning of all, she casually mentioned equipment modifications that had never been publicly documented. After the session ended, Torres confronted Vera in the parking lot. Several witnesses later reported hearing him accuse her of being a fraud who was profiting from stolen valor. When Vera simply walked away without engaging his accusations, Torres became convinced he was right. That evening, Torres made calls to 3 different military investigation units and the FBI. He provided detailed reports about Vera's demonstration of classified techniques, her apparent knowledge of sensitive protocols, and her inability to explain how she'd acquired these skills through legitimate channels. The investigators who received Torres's reports took them seriously because stolen valor cases had become a priority for the military justice system. When they ran Vera's name through official databases, they found records showing standard Army service with a military intelligence unit, no SEAL training, no special operations qualifications, no explanation for the advanced skills Torres had witnessed. Within 48 hours, a joint task force involving military investigators and federal agents had built what they believed was a solid case against Vera. They had witness testimony, video evidence from the training session, and official records that seemed to contradict her capabilities. The agents who came to arrest Vera that Sunday had already decided she was guilty. They'd seen cases like this before, veterans who inflated their service records to gain credibility and financial advantage in the private sector. They expected her to break down, confess, maybe implicate others in a larger stolen valor scheme. What they didn't expect was for Vera to accept the handcuffs, with the same calm professionalism she'd shown in the face of Torres's accusations. As they read her rights, she made no protests, offered no explanations, asked for no mercy. She simply looked at our father and said, "There are things about my service that even you don't know." That statement would haunt all of us for the next 3 days, as we tried to understand how the woman we thought we knew could be living such an elaborate lie. The first thing our father did after Vera's arrest was call every military contact he'd built over 30 years of service. Rex Blackwood had friends in intelligence, special operations, and command positions throughout the armed forces. If there was a classified explanation for Vera's skills, he was determined to find it. But every call hit the same wall. His contacts were sympathetic but firm. There were no records of Vera Blackwood serving in any SEAL capacity. Some of his friends went further than they should have, checking databases they weren't supposed to access. But they all came back with the same answer. According to every official record in the military system, Vera had served honorably but unremarkably in a standard Army intelligence unit. "I'm telling you, Rex, if your daughter was a SEAL, there would be records," his old friend General Martinez told him during a tense phone call. "The military doesn't just lose track of people who go through that kind of training. It's impossible." Meanwhile, our mother was falling apart. Diane had always been the emotional anchor of our family, but watching her daughter sit in federal detention accused of living an elaborate lie was destroying her. She couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, and kept asking the same question over and over. How could we not have known? I found myself caught between defending Vera and facing the mounting evidence against her. The federal prosecutor assigned to her case, a sharp woman named Assistant U.S. Attorney Rebecca Chen, had built what looked like an airtight case. She had witness testimony, video evidence of Vera demonstrating techniques that shouldn't have been in her skill set, and official military records that contradicted everything Vera appeared to be. But then something happened that changed everything. On the second day of Vera's detention, I was going through her apartment looking for anything that might help with her defense when I found something that didn't make sense. Hidden behind a false panel in her bedroom closet was a small wooden box that I'd never seen before. Inside were items that told a completely different story about my sister's service. Military challenge coins from units I'd never heard of, photographs of her with special operations personnel whose faces were deliberately obscured, and a sealed letter addressed to be opened only if my cover is blown. My hands were shaking as I opened that letter. What I read made me understand why Vera had been so calm during her arrest, and why she'd made that cryptic statement to our father. The letter was brief but devastating. If you're reading this, then something has gone wrong with my operational security. Everything you think you know about my military service is a carefully constructed cover story designed to protect ongoing operations and the lives of people still in the field. I cannot defend myself without compromising national security and endangering others. The only person who can verify my true service record is Admiral Patricia Westbrook, currently assigned to Naval Special Warfare Command. Tell her Blackwater Compass and she'll understand. I stared at those words for a long time before the implications hit me. My sister hadn't been lying about her service. She'd been telling a different kind of lie, one designed to protect secrets, so sensitive that even her own family couldn't know the truth. When I brought the letter to the Federal Detention Center, Vera read it and nodded slowly. "I hoped you'd never have to find that," she said. "But since you did, you need to understand something. I can't defend myself in court without putting other people's lives at risk. There are operations still running, people still in the field, whose safety depends on certain information staying classified." "Then what do we do?" I asked. "We trust the system," she said. "Admiral Westbrook will come when she's ready. Until then, we wait." But waiting felt impossible when the prosecutor was pushing for a trial date just 2 weeks away. Chen was confident in her case and wanted to move quickly before media attention could complicate things. She'd already filed motions to prevent Vera from claiming classified service as a defense, arguing that such claims were standard tactics used by stolen valor defendants. That night, our father made a decision that surprised all of us. Instead of continuing to work through official channels, he contacted a military attorney named Major Sarah Lynch, who specialized in cases involving classified operations. Lynch took one look at the letter and the items from the hidden box and told us something that gave us the first real hope we'd had since Vera's arrest. "These aren't the kind of things you can fake or buy online," Lynch said. "If your daughter is a fraud, she's the most sophisticated one I've ever seen. But if she's telling the truth, then we're dealing with something way above my security clearance." The question now was whether Admiral Westbrook would arrive before it was too late, to save my sister from a prison sentence that could destroy her life. Walking out of that courthouse with Vera felt surreal. After 5 days of believing my sister might be living an elaborate lie, I was struggling to process that she was actually more than we'd ever imagined. The woman who had quietly endured federal charges rather than compromise national security was the same person who helped me with homework when we were kids and never missed a family birthday. The immediate aftermath was complicated in ways I hadn't expected. Vera was free, but the experience had changed all of us. Our father, who had spent 30 years in the military and thought he understood classified operations, was shaken by how completely he'd been kept in the dark about his own daughter's service. "I spent decades working in intelligence," Rex told me that night as we sat on his back porch. "I thought I knew how deep these programs could go. But to create an entirely false service record, to maintain that deception even from family, that's a level of compartmentalization I never imagined." Our mother's reaction was perhaps the most difficult to watch. Diane had spent years worrying about Vera during deployments, but she'd always assumed she knew the basic parameters of her daughter's risk. Learning that Vera had been conducting operations far more dangerous than anything in her official record was devastating. "All those nights I couldn't sleep, wondering where she was and what she was doing," Diane said through tears. "I thought I was worrying about the worst possibilities, but I had no idea how much worse it actually was." For Vera, vindication came with its own challenges. She was bound by the same security oaths that had nearly sent her to prison, which meant she still couldn't share most of the details of her service with us. The difference now was that we understood why she couldn't talk, and that understanding changed how we related to her silence. "I know you have questions," she said to me a week after her release. "I wish I could answer more of them than I can. But what I can tell you is that every day I was deployed, I thought about coming home to this family. That's what kept me going through the hardest missions." The legal consequences extended beyond Vera's case. Carlos Torres, the man who had initiated the investigation, faced his own federal inquiry into how he had gained access to classified training sessions and why he had made accusations without proper verification. The last I heard, He'd been quietly blacklisted from working with any government contractors. Prosecutor Rebecca Chen handled her role in the case with remarkable professionalism. Rather than being defensive about prosecuting an innocent person, she used Vera's case to push for better protocols when investigating stolen valor claims involving personnel who might have classified service records. Cases like this remind us that there are people serving our country in ways that the public will never know about, Chen told the media in a carefully worded statement. We have an obligation to protect both the integrity of military service and the operational security of our most sensitive programs. For our family, the biggest change was learning to live with mysteries we couldn't solve. Vera remained the same person she'd always been. But now we understood that her quiet strength came from experiences we'd never fully comprehend. Her nightmares made sense now. Her hypervigilance at family gatherings wasn't paranoia, but professional instinct developed through years of operations we couldn't imagine. The compass tattoo, which had seemed like personal decoration, became a reminder of just how little we really knew about the people we love most. Every line in that design represented coordinates, missions, and memories that would remain classified long after Vera was gone. What I learned from watching my sister face federal charges rather than compromise her oath is that real heroism often goes unrecognized because the most important sacrifices happen in shadows. There are people protecting our freedom whose families will never know the full extent of their service, whose neighbors will never understand why they seem different from everyone else. Vera returned to her work as a contractor, but now I understood that even her civilian career was another form of service. She was training the next generation of people who might one day face the same impossible choices she had faced. The woman who was almost destroyed for allegedly posing as a SEAL had taught us all something profound about the nature of service and sacrifice. Sometimes loving someone means accepting that there are parts of their life you'll never understand. And sometimes the greatest act of patriotism is living with secrets that could save lives but destroy families. That compass tattoo still catches the light when she moves her shoulder, but now I see it differently. It's not just a memorial to her service. It's a reminder that some of the most important stories can never be fully told.